Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. I hope everyone has had a wonderful ending to their week. I hope everyone is safe and that their families and friends are safe. And I hope that hopefully the weekend starts off on a good note as we roll into tonight. There has been a little bit of a reduction in international news today, but there was a lot of stuff coming out of Ukraine. So there's going to be a lot of focus on Ukraine tonight. And I know that every day there's probably a lot of questions that people get through to us, and I want to try and do something at the end of tonight's stream where I go through and I can answer questions to the best of my ability, regarding using what knowledge I have from personal experience in the military and in general of what kind of we're seeing regarding the Ukrainian conflict, or really anything going on in the world. The fight on ISIS as well. I would like to think I'm at least well informed on what's going on with that, just because I did spend a significant amount of time there. So if you have any questions regarding world news and you're not too worried about having a little bit of some opinions thrown in there, then go ahead and ask a question. Be more than happy to answer some questions tonight. It is Friday night, might as well. We got a little bit. I'm not as pressed for time because I don't have work in the morning, so we'll try to answer some questions. So go ahead, throw them up in the chat. Riley, who's helping me do this stream every night, will end up passing those along to me in a little note, and I'll try and get to those at the end of the stream. But in the meantime, do also remember that there is a lot of stuff going on in the world, and there's a lot of humanitarian efforts that could really use our help. We're currently looking for some stuff regarding South Africa and stuff going on in the Philippines and Thailand, as some storms have really ravaged those areas. So we're trying to go through and vet some different sources for donations for that. And then right now we also have humanitarian war effort fundraisers in the description. We have links to those that we vetted for the Ukraine war and the ongoing humanitarian crisis both there and throughout Europe as a result. And we also have the links for what's going on in Somalia right now as they go through a very severe drought that is going to especially affect children underneath the age of the ages 5 and under, and that is coming directly from the United Nations, so we can kind of trust that information, as this is projected to occur both currently, as 90% of the nation of Somalia is dry right now, and that is projected into June right now. About 350,000 children and people in general are going to more than likely pass away from the drought, and a lot of those humanitarian funds going to other places such as Somalia were actually rerouted to assist with the humanitarian crisis going on as a result of the Ukrainian war. And so with that, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on both in Russia and especially inside of Ukraine today. A lot of developments, especially in the south and in the east. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is the fact that there's a large number of IEDs that have actually been found north, kind of in the Kiev Oblast, up in that northwest region. Now that Russian forces aren't there anymore, we don't know if Russian forces built these or if these were left by partisan activity that was occurring during the occupation. Normally, at this point, you'd probably see more standard munitions, so it's very good, or could be a good indicator that partisan activity has been occurring. We do know that around 70 Russian troops have been killed by partisan activity near Melitopol. And so it's highly likely that in these densely populated areas that it was also occurring here. And that may have been one of the things that triggered such levels of brutality that we have seen from Russian forces. Some of those atrocities may be contributed to frustration due to partisan activities, on top of just a general distaste and what could be no better called at this point a possible genocide, as the International Criminal Court is currently looking into the allegations of such, and over 6,000 articles of evidence so far have already been recovered and documented both by Ukraine and international teams, as we do know international investigative teams are on the ground currently and also doing an independent investigation into the atrocities. But regardless of whether or not Russia made them or if Ukraine made them, they are still just as dangerous to anybody that happens to find them as any kind of purpose-built landmine or explosive rocket, you name it. They are just as dangerous. And we actually have a photo here of it. See, now that is going to ruin your day. That's going to explode and throw all of those nails and shrapnel and whatever else they shoved in this tin can in your face, through your body, and that is nothing but a terrible, terrible thing for whoever happens upon this unwittingly. However, there is some good news coming out of Ukraine today. Something going on kind of in the areas that Russia has withdrawn from. And we see that as they withdrew, the Ukrainians moved in, of course. And we're seeing a lot of abandoned pets. And we actually had a little bit of a discussion regarding this a couple days ago, regarding some abandoned pets and animals that had been adopted. And right now, unfortunately, a lot of people couldn't take their pets. I mean, you don't know if you're going to have to leave them at the border. You don't know kind of what's going to happen. And it's kind of a rush to get out of the war zone. And so between you and, for the most part, children, as 2/3 of the country's children have left at this point, I know a lot of us think of pets as an extension of our family. I certainly do. But when something like this is happening, a war's going on, I mean, there's not a lot you can take anyway, and a lot of pets were left abandoned, unfortunately, and a lot of owners were also killed. And we can see Ukrainian soldiers actually taking care of them now. This does have copyrighted music, but of course these sweet puppies, of course, are getting taken care of. Little skittish, however, it doesn't last very long. We all know how puppies enjoy food and love and attention. And it's good to see Ukrainian troops, giving these dogs much needed love and affection after being what could probably only be described as traumatized and maltreated throughout this entire time. So a little bit of good news. Everyone likes to see puppies. I certainly love to see puppies. I love cats and dogs and horses. All three of those are like my top favorite animals in the world. Just because I think it's illegal to own a red panda. And so we're going to go ahead and move on. And as we get into Kharkiv, we have more good news. A Russian K-52, which is also known as the Alligator, it's one of the more modern helicopters in the Russian fleet, was actually shot down, and we have some photos of that. The crew was unable to escape, as it is not very easy to bail out of a helicopter, and they did not survive. But as we can see here, the destruction is absolute. You can't even hardly tell that is a K-52 anymore. That's about the only identifiable piece in this whole aircraft. So good, another valuable piece of equipment the Russians have lost. However, that is at least on this part of the region where the good news ends. And we could see today that Russia struck back. And one of the things that it was a reoccurring theme, and we'll see this a couple times, is that over the last 48 hours, Ukraine has shelled several border cities. We went over that yesterday as I had titled the video, Ukraine Strikes Back. They had shelled multiple border cities. They sunk the Moskva, which we have more information on today. And Russia today retaliated. And one of the things we saw is yesterday, the air raid sirens for some of the parts of this country haven't gone off in days, some of them weeks, and every single region in the entire country of Ukraine had air raid sirens go off yesterday. And Russia has gone back to bombarding. There was strikes outside of Kyiv. There were strikes all across the country. I believe even over by Lviv. We haven't gotten a lot of information about the western side of the country, but we could see today another strike that happened in Kharkiv today. Not very long, but you can tell that there was a pretty significant strike in the city of Kharkiv today. But we can see even more stuff moving to the front, and as this area continues to heat up, Russia is still pouring. It seems like it's endless at this point. So, and you'll see why here in a little bit as well. But the amount of men and materials, weapons, equipment, vehicles that they are just pouring in for this offensive seems almost endless. And today we have videos coming out of the Luhansk region of them bringing in even more fixed artillery that's getting towed artillery weapons into the fight and bringing it to the front lines. And these aren't small artillery pieces either. These are large towed artillery guns that are going to be moving to the front lines. They're going to be put in place. They're going to set up their batteries, and they're going to join those ongoing bombardments throughout this entire region we're seeing over and over and over again, pounding places like Poznan and areas around Donetsk and along this front lines, because this area of the front lines, because Ukraine has been at war with separatists since 2014. And this area, especially in Donetsk, but these border regions are heavily fixed, dug-in positions on both sides. It's essentially turned into trench warfare, which is something that plenty of places, including I think even Vice News, went to Ukraine and covered. And so the area between is scattered with landmines. There's trenches on both sides of no man's land. They're heavily fortified, clearly dug in, static defensive lines that are going to be very difficult to punch through. It's very going to be very difficult fighting and very bloody fighting. And what Russia is going to do is they're using artillery such as Grad systems and these towed artillery systems, and they're going to saturate these areas with artillery and try and soften up and destroy some of those defenses that the armor and also their infantry can then pour through the gaps in their lines and try and encircle and outflank the different Ukrainian positions as they're going to be kind of fixed in place once they get to that front. However, we can also see that Ukraine is also preventing them from doing this accurately as they shot down yet another Orlan drone today. The Orlan drone is it uses literally a Canon camera. We saw one getting taken apart by the intelligence service a couple days ago in Kyiv, and we can see more of that today as another one gets shot down. But it literally uses a Canon camera, and like they put a bottle, filled it with gasoline, and told it to fly and screwed the cap back on. It's not that crazy it's not something super high tech, but it is used to spot and accurate use to identify and target Ukrainian positions. So another one out of the sky is good news. And a lot of people have been saying a lot of things about in TikTok regarding this war. And I think this is something that should probably be discussed a little bit. A lot of people have said, oh, TikTok, the TikTok army, which is the Chechens. We've called them that here too. I will continue to call them that, as the Chechens seem to be absolutely useless as a military force. But for propaganda, whatever, if it works in Russia's favor for their own purposes, it's not really the rest of the world laughs, so who cares? But TikTok especially has kind of gotten a little bit of heat as being an unreliable source. And I think something that's worth noting is this has been, for every country in the world, one of the most... Everyone talked about Iraq because every unit in Iraq had some kind of reporter embedded with the units, regardless if it was special forces or if it was standard ground forces during the invasion. Didn't matter. They had reporters embedded with them, and it was called the best covered war ever in history. I think even more so we can see that now. And this is something that you're starting to see former and current military commanders kind of comment on, even in mainstream media, because things like TikTok and social media have allowed the war in Ukraine between two relatively first world countries, which has access to all of the internet and everything else, to make this war a intelligence. It's insane for the intelligence agencies because the amount of information coming in is overwhelming. Because we can see some guy on TikTok posting artillery pieces moving around in Luhansk. Some intelligence guy that's a lot smarter than I am is going to be able to tell you where in Luhansk that is. And they're going to be able to track where this artillery piece goes just because some people are posting things on TikTok. And this goes for Ukraine too, which is why we see a lot less stuff about Ukraine coming out when there's counteroffensives. But this war is the most transparent war in history. There will never be a war more transparent until something better than social media comes up than this. Both sides, there are things coming out of Russia, as we see. There's stuff coming out of Ukraine, all along the border regions. All over, social media has made this conflict between two first world nations so transparent that it's very hard to get an edge because the enemy knows where you're at and what you're doing at any and all points of time. So while TikTok can be seen as something unreliable, really it's not, because every person that has a smartphone can pull up TikTok, record where Russians are moving in any given area in any of these countries, and it tells each side what is going on with the other, where their troops are going, how many are going there, what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're bringing to the fight, and it makes it very hard for any side to get an edge, because realistically that gives you even better idea how many troops and how many tanks and how many vehicles and artillery pieces are being brought into the Donbass and Donetsk. So if it's good for the Ukrainian and Western intelligence agency, it's good enough for me. Now, with that over, we're going to go ahead and move over onto some more missile strikes. And this comes in a same kind of idea of those retaliations that we're seeing from Russia. And of course, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Donbass already, and they're seeing those strikes continuously. But we have even more. We don't know what the target was. We don't know what the casualties were. We just know that the strike occurred. So we got some photos here to start with, but we also have some videos. So this was not at all a small strike. But that's not the only thing going on in Donetsk, of course. We also have more Russian helicopters that were spotted. These are Mi-24 Hinds. They're a variant of it. They have multiple variants, but in general, they're a heavy attack helicopter. They're known for being very resistant from ground fire. Manpads, not so much. We've seen plenty of those shot down, but the resistance against small arms fire, they're very durable, and they can carry a large payload. So we saw more of those flying around in the region today. A lot of these clips are very short, and I do apologize, but information, you kind of have to take it for what you can, because while I did just say this is the most transparent war ever in history, we know more about this war and what's going on every single day and every single minute and hour of the day than ever in history, than any military commander ever could in history. It's still, a lot of this stuff is very short. They're not wanting the Russians to know that they're being filmed, because it normally doesn't end very well. There's some fear definitely there. But there is some good news. And this is something I found very last minute. Actually, while we were looking at other sources for some of the other stuff in this stream. But today I actually found out that Ukrainian farmers, I deeply apologize, Ukrainian farmers began sowing their fields today in Zaporizhia, less than 30 kilometers from the current front lines. And this is a big deal because the Ukrainian farmers are like the second largest armored force in the world now after they've stolen more Russian armored vehicles than any country in the world could ever possibly buy. But today they've transitioned and they are going back to their yearly routines. This is kind of a interesting moment, as of course the war is still going on, but people still need to be fed. Food still has to be grown, and Ukraine is what is essentially the breadbasket of Europe. And so without Ukraine, that's one of the reasons why food prices have gone so high, because Ukraine is one of the largest grain exporters in the world. So that's one of the reasons, on top of the other logistics issues that we're seeing. But that's one of the reasons you're seeing food prices rising. That's causing protests in places like in South America and Central America. In those Latin American countries, such as Argentina and Peru. But today we can see that they're not letting that stop them. As today they were out and about tilling their fields, even as unexploded ordnance lay in the mud not very far away. And they're wearing bulletproof vests and everything still. Still war, but they got a job to do. So I'm glad to see that. That's very good news. It's something that kind of gives, it's something to give you hope. And everyone could use hope, especially as we move down towards Mariupol. And Mariupol had a lot of interesting stuff today. The first major development, as you can see, a large chunk, a lot of these lines here that we had stretched all the way over the Azovmosh, and today those shrunk significantly, as we did learn today that the Azovmosh was officially overrun. In fact, photos came out on Telegram from Russian forces who had been inside the factories. It's very interesting. Inside the factories around the Azovmosh, officially showing that it had been taken. And so we can see, and we have enough information to say that this is no longer in Ukrainian control, and this is a very large swath of land that we had previously said was under control. Likewise, there's been a lot of heavy fighting in and around the port of Mariupol. Some places are saying they've taken it, including the Institute for War. Other places are not. We have seen videos of some fighting along here. We did not know when they came out, so it was very difficult to tell and kind of put it here in a daily news update. So we're still hearing that it is contested, and so I did shrink it a little bit. I had it up here, but that is now kind of moved along, as we do know the port is still contested, but heavily contested. So it's kind of half and half now. Just based on our observations, I kind of took the sources that we were having in the conflicting reports, and I kind of cut it down the middle, as that's probably about where it is. New laws are taking effect inside of Mariupol today, at least in the Russian occupied zones. And this is, once again, it's very difficult to confirm what is going on in Mariupol. Much like you can't get a lot of, you can't get supplies in and out, you can't get verifiable information in and out. So, but today it's been reported that it has been made illegal in the occupied parts of Mariupol to bury the dead. And not only that, we do know with relative certainty that at least 13 mobile crematoriums are currently operating around the clock inside of Mariupol. We've heard that they are cleaning up for a May 9th parade as they are trying to get the city to fall in order to have one. And they have also reportedly begun to exhume the dead that were already buried in the parks and home gardens and the medians throughout the occupied parts of the city, as the graveyards have filled to the point that there is no other place to bury people's loved ones. And while I know that they want the propaganda piece to have a May 9th parade, there's not much of a place to have it, as 95% today, or over 95% of Mariupol today, has been destroyed. And that is coming from multiple sources, including the mayor of the city of Mariupol. But we can see here that the city is there's nothing left. There really isn't anything left. It's not probably even right to call it a city anymore. It's more or less probably more correct to call it the ruins of Mariupol than the city of Mariupol. So we're going to take a look here. So we're going to cut it there. But as you can see, there's not really anything left. Mariupol is destroyed. For all intents and purposes, there's not really much left. And whatever kind of remnants remain still standing, the Russians continue to pulverize them into the dirt. As the shelling of the city continues and these offensives continue day in and day out, day after day. Now, the defense of Mariupol so far has been something that will go down and it will become history, and then it will become legend, and then it will become myth. Because the defense of Mariupol against overwhelming odds, the Azov and the Marine battalions that were there only had about 4,500 troops in Mariupol to start with. Let alone the Russian forces, which have an increasing presence as they bring in even more troops trying to finally take this city after over a month and a half. And they have, at this point, between 3 and 4 times that number. We somewhere between something like 12 to anywhere from 12 to 20,000 troops trying to take the city of Mariupol in and of itself. And they still can't. Which is nothing quite like this has been seen in history. There are probably some very far off references I may be not remembering off the top of my head, but this is talking about overwhelming firepower and still being able to. They're still fighting. The city hasn't fallen yet. They've taken losses, and while yes, today there was some pretty significant losses of ground, the Ukrainians aren't done yet. They're still fighting, and they're fighting vigorously, and we can see that here as there has been some pretty, as the Russian forces are still having to slog through stiff urban resistance, even now, after there's been, some were captured, killed, surrendered, and it's 51 days at this point. So let's take a look.
Зачищать пятиэтажки, которые нам предстоит сейчас выдвинуться.
So as we can see, there's still fighting going on in Mariupol. And we actually also saw today the Chechens seem to have gotten their first real contact. It looks like they were ambushed, probably while they were trying to shoot another propaganda video. But not only did, and when they took their very first real contact with the enemy, they ran. As far as we could tell, the Chechens have fought the Ukrainian forces in Mariupol one time. I say fought. They've met the Ukrainian forces in Mariupol legitimately one time thus far, and they ran. Further solidifying their point, they are nothing more than a propaganda campaign. And so we actually have a video of that today. Survived, looked around, saw a bunch of burning vehicles, is like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. Yeah, this isn't really what I signed up to do. And they just left. So, yeah, they're just there for propaganda purposes. I don't think the Russians actually trust them to do fighting. Just based on their tactics, they look more like poorly trained militia fighters in the Middle East than they do any kind of real powerful, aggressive military force. Just based on their propaganda videos, they show absolutely no tactical skill whatsoever. And so I believe if they had actually gone into combat, they probably would have been immediately wiped out by the Azov forces. And especially now that they're extremely battle experienced, the Ukrainian forces are. If the Chechens got dedicated at this point, it'd just be a massacre probably. I do not expect that they would do any kind of good. They would just be a hindrance. And they'd just end up blocking the streets for actual Russian forces. They're, a little bit more competent than the Chechens are trying to actually take the city. However, we got some more interesting news, and that is here at the Azovstal. And today we know that for the first time in this war, the Tu-22 M3s, which are high-level heavy bombers. So think of the modern equivalent of those bombing campaigns during World War II, where a bunch of, hundreds of B-17s flying over Europe and dropping just giant clusters of bombs out their bomb bay doors and then flying off. The stuff of World War II, the jet equivalent of that now has been used in Mariupol and for the first time during this war, and the imagery is very reminiscent of that time. It looks like World War II in color. That is what this looks like. So we have a couple of different things. The first thing I'm going to show you is the jet itself. Like I said, it's a heavy, high-altitude bomber, long-range strategic bomber. It's basically the Russia's equivalent of the B-52. They do have an older variant from the Soviet Union that's like a prop-driven aircraft. But that is their jet long-range strategic bomber. Like I said, much like the B-52 in the United States. And this is reportedly footage of the bombing campaign on the Azovstal today by those very same bombers. So let's take a look. I mean, once again, it just looks like World War II in color. You could imagine this being any factory in Nazi Germany getting bombed by an air raid of B-17s. All those black and white photos, just watch the line go across here. So, very concerning. When you talk about indiscriminate bombing campaigns, this is the kind of thing that they talk about that we moved away from during World War II because we came up with much more accurate things that wouldn't cause massive civilian casualties. This is the kind of thing that causes massive civilian casualties. They haven't used it yet until today, and now that they've used it, where else are they going to use it? Mariupol has been bombed and shelled into oblivion at this point. They're either dead, have fled, been deported, or have miraculously survived, are in hiding and terrified for their lives every single day. That is whoever is left here in Mariupol. But what about places like Donetsk, or Kharkiv, or Kramatorsk, which we know is going to be a very strategic city during the second phase of the operation, or Zaporizhia, or Dnipro? All of those places are still heavily populated. So what if the Russians use it there? I mean, the door is open now. They've opened that can of worms. They're not against using the strategic bombers for those massive bombing campaigns. And so it really opens up a can of worms when it comes to the question of where else would they use it. But here in Mykolaiv, we also know that not even the dead have seen the end of war. Now, that is a little bit of a play on words off of a very famous quote. Only the dead have seen the end of war. However, apparently not, as we can see here. The Russians have no problem shelling a cemetery. I mean, after you die, you can't even get away from it, apparently, because the Russians are still going to shell where you're buried. Or they're going to dig your grave up, as we're hearing out of Mariupol. So, quite concerning. I don't know who would place a military target in this big open area. That's a cemetery. There's no strategic value of holding military targets there. Apparently, Russia has stated that they shelled this area, saying that there is some kind of a military facility here. I can't believe that would be ever conceivably true. It's a cemetery. Who puts military targets in a cemetery? Just a bad idea because they're out in the open. So, I don't believe so. I think they're probably just shelling Mykolaiv to shell it, and they happen to hit the cemetery. So, take that for what it is. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine didn't get their own little fill today, as we saw Russian tank destroyed today by Ukrainian Marines along here on this front line as they continue that counteroffensive towards Kherson. And so it's been very quiet lately here in this area. One thing, one or two things a night, not a big blast of information like we were hoping for, but it's always good to get at least something, and we can see that happening here. So there it went. Watch that again. Yep, there we go. So you gotta love watching Russian stuff blow up. It's always something enjoyable to see. It's one less thing that they need to worry about. In less than 48 hours after the Moskva was sunk by Ukrainian forces, it was hit originally 48 hours ago, about 24 hours ago. It was officially declared as sunk by Russian news agencies. They said that there weren't any casualties immediately. We'll get to that here in a moment. But already we have seen, based on Sentinel-1 satellite footage that other organizations have put together and been watching, because we're still getting our hands on it. At least 2 vessels were seen steaming out of port back into the Black Sea, and we also saw a large contingent of supply and troop landing ships moored offshore. So we actually have some photos here of that. So we can see the ships leaving out here. From Sevastopol, we can see those ships that have been moored off the island, or off of Crimea. And so this is satellite footage once again from the Sentinel-1 satellite, which just came in today about 6:36 p.m. local time, it appears. So very interesting. Now, we do know that all ships in the Black Sea were ordered back to Sevastopol after the Moskva was hit, reportedly by at least two Neptune anti-ship missiles. I almost said anti-tank missiles, but we did get some more news regarding this, and this is that the commander of the ship, Anton Anton Kuprin, was killed during the detonation of the powder magazine aboard the ship. However, I did see a list, however it couldn't be confirmed, so we're not going to post it here, but several others, and I mean about a dozen or so others, were not listed as checking into medical services in Sevastopol from survivors of the ship. So that means that more than likely, while Russia does confirm finally that at least one person was killed and it was the commander of the ship, that it is probably likely more have been killed officially. And we actually have the snippet. This is the guy who asked the defenders of Snake Island to basically, hey, give up. And then he also ordered the bombardment of Snake Island after they told him to go screw himself. And so we also know that the ammo storage supposedly wasn't very great aboard the ship, as we can see here. You can see the feet of a Russian sailor back there. There's just ammunition shells everywhere. This is supposedly off of the Moskva. We don't know if this is. We can't confirm it, of course. I mean, it's a warship in a time of war, but this is concerning regardless of what Russian ship this is. Very, very, very concerning. This is not how you store ammo. So now, while I believe the Neptune missile theory is true, it may not have even been in the powder magazine they had to hit this for this thing to go off, because that That is just absolute terror. That scares me to look at. I could not imagine walking around there. And you imagine if the tips of one of those just hit the wrong spot and hit the primer on the shell? Just one. Just, we know it was rough seas. It's all it would have took. Like, nothing is secure there. So that is terrifying. I really hope we are Ukrainian biased here. We've officially declared that very openly. After a lot of the atrocities we've seen at this point, we can't in moral, like with any moral compass, begin to support anything Russia has seen, especially after we've debunked so many things that they have said. So we are Ukrainian biased here, and I really hope every single Russian ship is loaded that way, because if it is, that is just an absolute disaster that I cannot wait to happen. And so we get to move on, and that's everything in Ukraine and just offshore, but there are some more stuff. So we're going to move right in once again into what's going on in Russia. And the first thing we know is there were missiles spotted flying over Belgorod, which is just across the border from Kharkiv. And so we can take a look here, and you can see several photos today of missiles over the city of Belgorod. I don't know, these look like they're being hit by air defense systems. Don't know if they're Ukrainian, don't know if they are Russian, but still, that is something ongoing. Also, as a result of a lot of this shelling, we're seeing a lot more helicopter activity, as in the Belgorod region we saw Russian helicopters flying near Nikolskoye. So let's take a look at that. And so, as we can see, there is a lot of helicopter activity across the border, and this probably comes as a result of there were reports that Ukrainian helicopters flew across the border and did some strikes up here along in these border regions in Russia. It's not the first time it's happened, as we saw plenty of that happening in Belgorod, but it seems within the last 48 hours, Ukraine has shelled multiple locations in Russia, not just Belgorod, which is a major hub for their logistics. So that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason, on top of the Moscow, that we're seeing this retaliatory actions. And so we'll probably see more. And over here in Tyumen, sorry, I'm not very good at pronunciation. But over here in Tyumen, this is something that I was talking about earlier regarding the seemingly endless stream of equipment. So something that is going to define the Donbass, or two things that are probably going to be defining the second stage of the war, is one, armored vehicle movements, large armored vehicle movements, as it's shaping up to be the largest tank battle since World War II, but also large amounts of artillery. So we're seeing that kind of stuff being brought in for both sides. Of course, we had this video earlier, but the amount of grad systems getting put on flatbed trains and taken to the Ukrainian front is jaw-dropping, to say the least. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. I mean, it starts all the way up it starts all the way up here, and it just keeps going and going and going and going and going. That is a lot of Grad rocket systems. It finally ends at this point, and then we see a bunch of tankers probably carrying fuel for these vehicles. Now, I don't know if they even have the ability to supply all of those vehicles with munitions and fuel and equipment, but that, while they may not be able to supply all of that within certain units, that shows with just Grads how much equipment and how much artillery, period. Because that's just one tool. That's just one piece of artillery, one type that is getting deployed to Ukraine for this operation. Just one type. And so that really kind of underscores what is being brought into the region as a whole. I mean, you're going to see 2S1s, 2S3s, the Mistas, Grads, plenty of S300 batteries. We've even seen tactical ICBM systems being moved. Not quite sure if they're going to Ukraine or if they're going to Europe or the European front. But it's very, very concerning. But that really shows you what Russia is going to be bringing to bear. It's going to be lots and lots and lots of armor, as they're expected to have about 40 battalion tactical groups at full combat capacity to begin this operation, let alone the support units being brought in for this. And it's going to be a very critical moment in this war. A very critical, tactical, and strategically important moment during this war. And it's going to be very decisive one way or the other. And we saw today very minor but very important unrest inside of Russia. And this is because a lone picketer named Tamara Grodnikova was once again solo picketing in Volgograd. And this is something that we haven't seen a lot of. But however, what's very important to note is this is not their first time being arrested. This is their 9th time they have been detained since the start of the special operation in Ukraine. Special operation. Since the invasion began. So, didn't even bother checking her documents. Just went up, said get in the car, and it was over. So, we actually have what appears to be a video here.
Наше государство нам объявило, что все мировые СМИ, серьезные, солидные, имеющие лицензию, которые отвечают за свои действия, они у нас признаны фейковыми. И они по этой причине заблокированы. Но мне непонятно. Я думаю, если поступает утверждение, что вот такая-то информация является фейком, то надо это доказать. Как считаете, что человек не должен сам свое мнение выражать?
Выражайте, пожалуйста. Демонстрируйте. Этим занимаются, поэтому дублируйте зачем? Позиционируйте себя.
Мы все любим свою страну, мы все хотим уважать свое государство и думать, что оно нам не лжет. Поэтому нам проще отвернуться от... Вот я, например, согласна на такую...
Didn't tackle her, didn't anything. Just calmly went up, knows who she is, probably by name. Went, okay, Tamara, it's time to put the signs away. Get in the car. Like this, the 9th time, and I don't know the sentiments. It didn't seem Russian folks were hostile against her necessarily, and I'm sure. I hope that major action isn't taken against her being the 9th time. But that shows that not everyone supports the war. A large majority do, not because they're bad people necessarily even. I wouldn't ever say that the Russian people are inherently bad people. Never. In fact, this war isn't the Russian people's fault. It's the fault of a small group of people that have a large amount of power inside of Russia. And I think that's a very important distinction to make between Russian and Ukrainian, or Russian people and the Russian government, is the fact that the Russian people are only understanding what is being told to them because the government has immense control over a regular person's everyday life in the country of Russia. They're hearing what they are being told by state-run media sources, multiple of them, all of them just different enough to make it seem like they're all different news networks saying different things, but everything has to be approved by the government. They're state-owned. So that's what they're hearing about this. There's laws that keep them from saying things that can't be said, that Russia doesn't want to be said. And so never, ever should anyone target the Russian people themselves. The Russian government, the Russian troops, the vast majority of whom are committing large atrocities at this point. Yes, but the people themselves in Russia, regardless of whether they support the war or don't support the war, I think they're not, and I wholeheartedly believe they're not at fault. And we shouldn't be angry with them as a group for not really having any other choice than to believe the war, because there's what other information is there. And the ones that openly defy it are very few and far and in between. And something not war related coming out of Russia today is the fact that there was a start to a hunger strike by prisoners in the Gulag in Dimitrovgrad today. And so apparently a bunch of prisoners originally started fasting. They were beaten, and then now hundreds of these prisoners went on a hunger strike yesterday. And so other prisoners, these prisoners were apparently Muslim, or they followed the belief of Islam. Their Qurans and their prayer rugs were purportedly destroyed. They were beaten, insulted, and now even prisoners who aren't part of the Islamic faith are now going into a hunger strike in solidarity with them. So it's pretty, obviously there's not great things happening in that prison. There's where we originally got this information from. Once again, we can't 100% confirm it, but we do know that there are news articles going on regarding that. So, very interesting news. Interesting to see something not war-related coming out of Russia. But we do have other stuff going on. Not a lot, however. So, in Israel today, there was a pretty big development. And the first thing that happened was the fact... So, to understand this, there's always been tensions between Israel and Palestine. In fact, when you're talking about the Human Rights Council, it's the only conflict regarding human rights that's actually explicitly talked about in their charter for the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, is the tensions between Israel and Palestine. And there has been a lot of different groups, including Palestinian groups and the Islamic State, who have conducted several shootings and atrocities in places like Tel Aviv and Hadera here further south. And as a result, tensions have kind of rose a little bit over the last couple of weeks at this point. And we've seen the IDF doing some also not so great actions. We've seen raids that have turned deadly in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. We've seen shootings at people or shooting of people, throwing rocks at them. So there's a lot of tension between the two groups. And today, Israeli intelligence services broke into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They, while a large number of Palestinians were there for prayer, and they said that they were seizing stones that Palestinians had been throwing at the military and police. And part of this is, and so far, reportedly 117 people were injured during this raid on the mosque. And so we have some information coming out of there today. So, I've had rocks thrown at me. In fact, I've had rocks thrown at me in a very interesting way. With those, what can only be described as those old-fashioned David versus Goliath style slingshots. In fact, that was a huge thing that protesters did when I was at the Baghdad Embassy compound in 2020, is they threw lots of stones at us. In fact, a couple broke some equipment, actually hit some people in the head, and they got a decent injury from it, but they're not weapons, right? And as you can see, this wasn't like the police came in, they arrested some people, they took the boxes away. This is, police came in, kicked in the door, threw in a bunch of 9 bangs, and then, all hell broke loose. Which is not the way you should probably go about going around like a mosque full of people that already don't necessarily like you, because there is a lot of tension between those two groups, and it is kind of a Islamic holiday month for them. It's Ramadan, if I remember correctly. So there's already a lot of stuff going on. There's already a lot of tensions. This probably doesn't help. And just based on the videos, I don't know if it was the appropriate response. I'm sure there was some more justifications that probably could have been brought to that. We obviously don't have all of the information, but it seems a little like an extreme, a little bit of an extreme take on the situation. And so I hope we get some more information to kind of clear up some of those things, and hopefully things shift a little bit, and we can see both sides of the story, because really we're, in that point of view, we're only getting the Palestinian side, which looks very, very dramatic, to say the least. And as we move up into Pakistan, there was an attack by unknown people in this region that left seven personnel from the Pakistani Armed Forces dead. No one has taken responsibility, but they attacked a military vehicle and then fled. And we actually have the photos of those that were killed in action here. This comes as there's been a large escalation of violence in that part of Pakistan, up as you get towards the tribal regions here in Afghanistan. But we've seen a lot more up here in the north. We've seen some against religious leaders by the Islamic State. We've seen some by Pakistan's version of the Taliban. They're actually a sect of the Taliban. So no one's quite sure. No one's taking responsibility as of yet, but it is likely one of those two groups, as that's two of the main groups that are currently dealing with and combating against the government forces in the country, especially in this area. And that's not the only attack. We do know that at least two employees are currently missing, and the head of the Electoral Commission in the region of Imo, Nigeria, was killed today. And this happens as an unknown group of militants broke into a settlement and started opening fire at a polling station. So there was a video to go with this. I reviewed it. While it didn't show any kind of like gore necessarily, it wasn't something that I deemed acceptable to come onto the stream. And so I may post it later onto the onto our Discord on the adult sections of that, the 18 plus not safe for work channels that we have for each region of the world, just so that way if people want to take a look at it, they can. It's nothing too gory, so there's no real gore in it. It's just a lot of people that were kind of held hostage at the time, but it's not something I want to be showing here on the channel, so we're going to stay away from that. But it did occur, and we have some video footage regarding that to back up those claims. And finally, moving on to Greece. And we're going to end our night on a good note here regarding the news. And that is I'm going to try and say this, Antikythera machine, I believe is how it's said, how it's pronounced. And that is what is considered the world's first computer. And it supposedly started up in 178 BC. They discovered this thing in 1901. For decades now, they have been trying to figure out how this worked, and they thought they have actually deciphered how it's worked by going through what inscriptions were still legible. But they also took this and they had experts go through and reconstruct it. It's like I said, it's considered the world's first computer. It could predict eclipses. It could tell when different athletic games could take place. It's not very big. It's filled with different gears and dials that were actually sealed together over the thousands of years that it's been sitting at the bottom of the sea. And so they believe it actually starts on December 22nd, 178 BC. And that is based off of when the next date is, which is actually, I believe, the winter eclipse or a winter solstice. So very interesting information. We have a couple of cool photos. This is the reconstructed version of it. Lots of, obviously, this is very, very, very advanced. This is a lot more advanced than what had been previously thought possible by the ancient Greeks. But as we know now, it was well within the realm of possibilities, and that changes a lot of things in history for us. Obviously, there's a lot of things regarding mathematics. This is coming from Cornell University, and this is talking regarding what they're finding out. So let's see if I got this correct here. The next day, December 23rd, is when the winter solstice started. So that's why they believe the next day on this calendar marks the start of this winter solstice for them. So very, very cool. Very advanced. There's also another article here on Live Science regarding this, if you want to check it out at some point. But every few years they find out just a little bit more. Unfortunately, so many things are lost to time. But something like this is an amazing discovery. It gives us a huge insight to how the ancient Greeks actually thought about the world, and how they could calculate some things, and how they could figure out, obviously, a lot of mathematics came out of ancient Greece, including Pythagorean's theorem. Some of the bedrock cores of different government structures came out of the ancient Greeks. Philosophy. They also have a lot of things that they wrote down and have served as historical records for really a place that we don't have a lot of information about. Much like the Romans, there are entire civilizations in the Mediterranean and in Europe that we would not know about and we have no record of other than the Greeks. Rome was the same way. There are entire civilizations of people lost to time that without the Romans and the Greeks, we wouldn't know anything about them. We wouldn't even know that they had existed at any point in time. And so it's very cool to find something this advanced and this elaborate to be able to study and find out just a little bit more about some ancient life and just how the Greeks thought. So hopefully they come up with more discoveries regarding that. So with that, that is all of the news for today. And so, from my understanding, there hasn't been any questions tonight. So, too bad. I was kind of looking forward to answering some questions, but I guess we do good enough job here that there isn't a whole lot. I do try to fill in some of the information with kind of my experiences and my understandings on certain situations with what I can give. That's, confident knowledge and competent knowledge there. I don't do anything really at a strategic level, but at a tactical level, I can kind of talk about that in a little bit, to some extent, not a grand scale, but to some extent. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the night. I appreciate everyone for joining us tonight. I really appreciate the staff team. They do a lot to help put this thing together every night, and I wouldn't be able to do it without them. And so once again, I really appreciate their help. Make sure you check out in the description below that we have lots of different places that you can go and you can actually put some good back in the world, because we have fundraisers going through. We vetted them. We make sure that money, the vast majority of that money, is going to the programs themselves and not to admission or administration's costs and salaries and stuff like that. We don't want to deal with that. We want to make sure that as much of the fundraising money actually goes to where it needs to go. It needs to actually help people. So that's part of the vetting process. And so right now, like I said, we're looking at things for Southeast Asia, for the tropical storms that have been coming through and ravaging that area, as well as the torrential floods in South Africa that so far, as of yesterday, 341 people had unfortunately lost their lives. But right now we have stuff for both the war effort and the humanitarian crisis that's going on as a result of the war in Ukraine, and also of the terrible, terrible drought, the worst one seen in a decade, that's currently affecting the Horn of Africa, specifically Somalia. So if you can't give a lot, give a little, help those places out, put a little bit of good back in the world. There's already enough bad things going on. The best at least we could do is put something good back into it. If you want to come join the rest of the community, we do have a Discord. The link is also in the description below. We'd love to have you. I'd love to have some pretty nice intellectual conversations with you. Pick your brains. You can pick mine. Hopefully we can learn something together. I'm always looking forward to learning something new. So please go in, join us. I'll be happy to have that conversation with you. Also, you can get a lot of information that we don't always cover here, but does get covered by other news agencies. A lot of people post that stuff there as well. There's entire sections dedicated to each region of the world, so nothing gets missed, and you can focus where your interests may lie at any given time, as well as any general chats. If you like memes and want to have a good laugh, there we have an entire section for that too. And so come on in to join us. We'd be happy to have you. If you do like this kind of stuff, if you do like the daily news updates that we do, go ahead, like and subscribe the video. We want to be able to get monetized so we can have these fundraisers on the streams and not just in our descriptions. And liking and subscribing to that video, telling your friends about us, really helps us out in trying to accomplish that mission and trying to be that continuing force for good. And so I appreciate everyone that's already done so, and will always continue to appreciate everyone that does so. So please help us out. We want to get some good things done, and we can't do it without your support and without your help. So once again, I appreciate you guys for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. For me, I'm going to try and enjoy the rest of my Friday night and relax after a nice long day, and we will be back once again tomorrow for another daily news update regarding the last 24 hours of news regarding both the special report on the invasion of Ukraine and also other issues going on worldwide. And with that, I will talk to you guys later. Have a great rest of your night. Goodbye.